subject we want to talk about today is about disruption, but not disruption in terms of late flights or ATC delays, but about market disruption. The kind of drivers are going to change the industry. We're looking at 2020 and beyond, the decade of disruption. And I'm looking forward to hearing some really great thoughts and ideas from the fantastic panel we've got here today about some of those drivers, whether it's around new business models like long-haul low-cost. It's not that new now, but it's still not proven, I don't think. Game-changing airliner programs that we may hear more about, or I'm sure we'll hear more about this week at Farnborough. And new entrants in the leasing sector, which is changing that business for people that have been established for a long time. And we have a lady on the panel, which is brilliant. So we've got some diversity. Not enough ladies, I'm sure you'd agree, Christine, but we have a lady. So I'd also like to talk about the disruption that we may see, hopefully we'll see, from better gender diversity in the industry, which we all agree, I think, is a crucial way, not just of ensuring that there's an equal share out of the work across the gender divide, but also to make this industry sustainable, because we can't sustain this on just with lots of men in the industry. It's just not going to happen. The growth that we're going to see in the industry will not happen without getting that gender diversity. So I'd like to start actually with a business model which I don't think there's anyone actually in the panel that is involved in it directly, although some of our leasing colleagues here will have been providing aircraft for the market. But I think long-haul low-cost is something that we talked about a long time. We've seen success and failure there. Arguably it's been happening for a long time in the backs of today's legacy airlines, but we're now seeing brands like Norwegian, Scoot and AirAsia X really driving that market and trying to make success. Now the products are available to deliver the economics, the operating economics and the range to allow it to happen. So I just wonder whether we're going to see the same transformation we've seen in short-haul low-cost, where we've seen all the legacy carriers either falling over or having to adapt rather than die, or whether we will just see this continue as a niche. The latest, obviously, development is IAG that have been very aggressive in the market with their Level brand, having launched that about a year ago, and they're already pushing that development. So I'm just wondering if there's anyone has a view, or if I can pick somebody. Anyone would like to say? Actually, Kaylin, you've been experimenting with all sorts of different cost bases and brands, so perhaps you can give us some thoughts on that.
With pleasure, Max. And thank you, everyone for participating today. I think it's a great initiative here at Farnborough to have this discussion. So I'd start by saying that one of the major trends that we've seen over the last 20 years is the brand diversification. In other words, that not every airline is going to be able to deliver a homogeneous product in all of its markets and all of its geographies. And so you saw some of this low-cost carrier disruption, if you like, in the shorter haul markets. Well received in many, many countries. And it took a while for the so-called legacy carriers to adjust. When we talk about longer haul, low cost, frankly, it's not that new a concept. And we, in our case, have more than experimented with it. At Air Canada, we created a company called Air Canada Rouge about 5 years ago, and it was doing long haul over the Atlantic with a 767. So, this is something that is not a concept that came up yesterday or was invented last week. But it's one that says, when we have a segmentation of the market, in our case, we segmented the market to characterize it as a leisure segment of the market. We know that we take a lot of traffic over the Atlantic for business travel, but there's a segment that is also for leisure, and we did not have with our so-called legacy cost structure and aircraft that had a lie flat product, et cetera, et cetera. That product was not suitable to what the leisure customer was going to pay. When you go long haul, clearly the competitive advantages that some of the new entrants have on the short haul don't exist, because a large chunk of the long haul cost is in fuel, and so it goes to the capabilities of the aircraft and the way you manage fuel, to the number of seats you're putting on the aircraft. So I would say that long haul is somewhat of an equalizer, that even the carriers that have a higher legacy cost structure, that have unionized workforces, that have pension arrangements, can compete quite well. So we did it by launching Rouge 5 years ago. British Airways, Air France, Lufthansa are now doing it with with their product, and I think it's something that we'll continue to see. I don't think that I'm ready to throw in the towel to the Norwegians of this world to say, we're going to get out of the long haul, lower cost business. And low cost doesn't have to be, everyone started using the expression ULCC, ultra low cost. Low cost can be lower cost, and you modify your product accordingly. I think that in this market that we're living in, with a brand diversification, there are horses for courses, and there's a product that can be built to satisfy that longer haul dynamic.
Thanks, Kelly. It's all very well offering low-cost fares, but it's getting the cost base to reflect that and make the business operate at a profitable level. I think that's the driver, isn't it? AJ, you run a low-cost airline in India, but predominantly, obviously, operating short, medium-haul routes. Do you see an opportunity for you, or do you see an opportunity in that sector growing rapidly, or how do you see that market?
Carriers in India will have to take passengers from India to different parts of the world. I think this business of actually hubbing traffic in the Middle East or in the Far East and then distributing it from those bases in the Middle East or the Far East, that's something that India would dearly like to leave behind. And for that, it's really important that we are able to take passengers to Europe, to the United States, to Australia, to Japan, and do it hopefully without a break. So just to have them fly directly. Now, how do you do that? You obviously need these larger, wide-bodied planes. But do the economics work? We are still trying to figure that one out. We would dearly like to take passengers to Europe and the United States. We have the traffic, as you know. We in our domestic network and in our short-haul international network, we have been flying with an occupancy of around 94-95% for the last 3 years. So the planes are very full. We have 1.3 billion people in our country. Only 3% of them fly. We are the fastest growing aviation market in the world. We are growing at 20% every year. Indians would love to fly as the economy grows 7, 8, 9% for the next several years. Indians are becoming richer. They would like to fly overseas, probably even more than they want to fly domestically. So the opportunity and the market exists. The question is, does the cost base work? Are the planes going to be light enough? Are they going to consume significantly, less fuel? Is it that we can put enough seats in there to get some of the advantage of short haul, low cost? Clearly, the advantages are not the same as they are in short haul. Flights as they would be in long haul flights. But is there still a model out there that we can use? We are exploring that, and we hope that we have some answers soon. We are talking to the aircraft manufacturers, and let's see if we can work something out. But clearly the market exists from countries like India, and in the foreseeable future, I think this is going to be the fastest growing market in the world, especially for medium to long haul flights.
Thank you. On that point, Steve, you've spent a lot of your time talking to the OEMs. I think we all know you've driven the design or definition of a lot of aircraft over the years. Do you think that we need to start with a clean sheet to deliver a long haul, low cost metal aeroplane, or carbon aeroplane, perhaps? Or do you think that there is actually aircraft out there today that can deliver the required operating economics?
No, I mean traditionally, a lot of the long-haul, lower-cost operators either start with used aircraft, as Kelly mentioned, 767-300ERs, A330 type equipment. But I think today's most current generation 787-9s, 787-10s, A350s, A330s, A330neo, all of those aircraft with proper seat densification and configuration to meet those customized markets can significantly lower the unit cost per seat by as much as 20 to 30% versus the legacy carriers. But the key is high utilization, high degree of efficiency, using your resources, your people, in a way that you get maximum utility out of those assets.
So you think
I don't think they need a new platform.
Right.
They simply have to take the existing platforms and and use densification of the aircraft to adapt to the markets and offer the unit cost efficiencies that the legacy carriers can't match.
I know that Kaylin operates the 787. Yeah, Jan, you have 787s as well at Saudia. Do you concur with that view that the aeroplane is available today that gives the operating economics to drive down fares and offer that, compete in that market?
Yes, no doubt about it. But look, if you speak about disruption, if you speak about the next decade, 2020s disruption years, this country, Saudi Arabia, is going through a big disruption process in a positive sense. If you just listen to the agenda of His Highness the Crown Prince, Agenda 2030, what's happening to the country? It's a disruption in a positive sense, from the status quo today. And this, of course, has a big impact on the airline, on the state airline, on the national carrier. Disruption that, in our case, started 2-3 years ago with the own Agenda 2020 to adapt to these changes. If you just listen to what's happening in the country, it's a young population, 32 million people. 70% of the population is younger than 30 years old. They are hungry. They are eager to travel. The country is opening up, women driving, making the country less dependent on oil, trying to get the diversification of the revenues. This is all having a massive impact on the airline, and we are seizing these opportunities. So yes, an example now is the introduction of the 787s, still with the legacy carrier concept, still with a modernized, lower cost, higher revenue generation, 787s. We have 10 787-10 on order, which we'll start receiving as of next year. We have already 13-9s in the operation. But on the game of the long haul, low cost, the formula that we adapted by His Excellency the General Director was to give birth to our own low-cost operator, ultra-low-cost operator, and the success that we have seen in the domestic market with this young population, with these eager, hungry people, is just amazing. And this, in my opinion, is most probably going to be the platform and the next step, not only to grow domestically with 17 million passengers that we carry every year on the domestic market, to go on the medium haul, expand internationally, but probably with an order of long-haul aircraft to adapt this model also to the ultra-low-cost, longer haul aircraft. But the platform for that, in my opinion, is perfectly suited with Flyadeal, which is the low-cost operator. So yes, the aircraft is being good for the legacy carrier, but I guess the aircraft will be even better if we started this operation on the long haul.
Thank you. Christine, you've got a wealth of experience. You're obviously heading up Flybe now. You were at CityJet and with Air France before. So you've seen both sides of the world, obviously operating now for a major regional carrier. What do you think the big disruptor will be in terms of business model over the next 10 years? Do you see long-haul low-cost really taking a grip, or do you think there's other things going to come into play?
I agree with my colleague that I think it's an evolution. I don't see that as a disruption. And I think the pressure on cost on any airline is such that you need also to answer to the demand of the market, to be more demand-led than supply-led. So I think that the evolution of low cost is an evolution also of new generation and need for a different type of product and answer, because they want to travel, but they want an affordable product. So I think it's an evolution that is quite expected. As a regional carrier, we are connecting and feeding, to long-haul players everywhere in the UK, because we are the first domestic airline in the UK, and we see this trend growing more and more. So the question in maybe the assets of legacy airline like Air Canada is that they have an infrastructure, a distribution system that is allowing them to also connect on any brand. It's more difficult when you're standalone low cost, and you need to have agreements that are quite complex with other regional airlines to fit onto your flight. So maybe the fact that the infrastructure is already in place is a big asset. For me, the big disruption, maybe in the regional scope, is more about technology and how we can adapt some of our systems and way to think, and to also understand customer needs, and how do we invest, in technology and to be smarter moving forward. So we say technology, and we are doing a lot of investment, is definitely having an impact on the full value chain of the airline industry. And in the next 10 or 20 years, I think we'll be surprised by some new innovations that will disrupt the way we think.
Thank you. Adel, obviously big low-cost operator in the Middle East and extending across to North Africa and Europe. So you've got a wealth of experience in that market. I think you're ex-British Airways as well, so you've worked for the big legacy carriers as well. How do you see low cost playing out in the long-haul market, and from your perspective, and also in a general term across the industry?
Thank you. Yeah, I spent all my life going downwards. I started with Concorde and moved to low cost.
That's a great. Actually, I've got to put
anything in between.
So was Concorde? Was that?
It was Concorde, then sort of the club world launch, and then into Gulf Air, and then into low cost. And the last one makes money. Honestly, I think the market disruption and the force is going to come from the customer. And we're seeing this happening. I mean, legacy is not a particularly nice word from a business perspective. Yeah, so it's something that's heavy. You don't want to see it. What we're seeing, apart from Europe, every country you go to, they tell you that 3/4 of our populations are young and under 30 years or under 25 years old. And all those people have access to technology today and all want to make their own decisions, and they all want to fly as they don't not prepared to spend money on too many things on an airplane. They want to stay in the best hotel, but pay the same price that they pay for a train or something to fly from a point to point. And we're seeing that. And as a result, we're seeing what is described as legacy carrier, almost quite a lot of them changing their business model. Most of them bringing in the sort of premium economy because the back end will have to be equivalent to the low cost. And the reason that is happening is when what customers are prepared to pay, the airlines cannot afford offering the service. So you got to offer a lower cost base. And I think probably low cost, long haul may be a challenging one from an airport infrastructures, because big airplane, airports are very slow. In low cost, you need more smaller airports, secondary airport to turn around your airplane quicker. I saw the whole football final match yesterday on the queue of Terminal 5. And that because I decided to move from the slow lane, fast track, to the general lane. So airports, it will not allow us to turn aircrafts quickly around. But I think we're going to see, in my opinion, probably 2 cabins on each airplane, a premium, and the train service at the back. So whatever name we will give it, probably by 2030, that's what will happen.
So the segmentation will be in the cabin.
I think so.
As it has been, obviously.
Aircrafts have always been aircrafts. You either get used old airplane, which is cheaper, but then it costs you much more to operate, or you're going to get new airplanes, which is more efficient, burn less fuel, and more expensive to have. But it's how do you manage the overall cost of your business, and you just got to be ready to do that, and that will happen on some of the sort of long-haul airplanes that has been produced, extremely cost-effective. Most of people in the low-cost airline industry, I think we're waiting to see whether one of us will come and say, I have a long-haul, low-cost, and made a lot of money, and probably everybody else will copy. We haven't seen that yet fully.
Right.
Well, it's interesting what Al says is it is about understanding the customer and the needs. We lease to all of these guys. There's various models. You have Norwegian, Level, WOW, AirAsia X, and we have some new ones on the way. And the real challenge is when you get the airplane ready for your long-haul, low-cost, you just made the key question. Do you have a 2-class or single-class? Because when you configure a fleet for premium economy, it costs you millions and millions and millions of dollars. People don't understand just how much money it costs to customize a cabin, particularly for that premium economy. And it works for some airlines on some markets, but other airlines are finding they cannot get a premium for the premium economy. And the real estate that they're putting on the airplane, that they're using on the airplane for these seats, It's just taking up too much space and they're not getting paid for it. And it's so hard to reverse course because it's cash out the door. And if you're doing it on 10 airplanes, you could easily be 50 million of hard cash down, and it's very hard to roll that back. So, you know, you talk about the disruption. Someone, as Adil said, will find the right way to do it. We have one guy who's got 500 all economy on a 777-300ER. If he can fill that, he will definitely make money. There's no question. But if he can't fill it, it's going to be tough going for him. We have other people with 787-9s, as you say, more expensive airplane, fuel efficient, but and that cabin is a premium economy as well as an economy. And that one looks like it's working for its market. So I think the long haul, low cost, the airlines have to be so careful about going into it. You can't just go in because everyone else is going in. Most people have got it wrong. So you really have to look very carefully and say, what part of my customer base, and that's where the technology comes in as well, can you interact in a much more effective manner with your customer base to understand what they'll pay for? I mean, anyone can give away a $10 bill for $9. My 7-year-old daughter can manage that, selling airplane tickets. But you've got to make sure that you get a margin. And as I said, we have seen many business models where tens of millions have been invested in a cabin, and the cabin gets ripped out because it didn't work, because the airline didn't understand the customer base. But there's definitely someone's going to crack the code.
You must get quite some interesting opportunities come across your desk, and you've got to work out which crazy idea is the idea to back, I guess, isn't it?
Got one this morning. But no, I mean, we do. I mean, look, we will move an airplane every 24 hours somewhere in the world to someone. So, you know, we're moving more than anyone out there. So we do see all kinds of business models, things that work, things that don't work. But someone's going to get this right. And it's clear that the market is speaking that Norwegian is someone who appears to be getting it right from the interest it has generated. From IAG, who's been, I suppose, one of the most effective consolidators in the world. And we also see Lufthansa seem to have some interest as well.
Sticking with the idea of the aircraft as opposed to the business model, do you see the potential for a new aeroplane? NMA obviously is the one everyone points to, but something like that where there's a clean sheet design where they change the thinking from 1956 for once in terms of a single aisle versus a wide body, and actually change the way that the aircraft's built from the conception perspective, that then delivers something to the operators that can really change the market?
I think they need to focus on what they're doing at the moment. There's just too many airplanes at the moment. If you look at Boeing, for example, we have 5 new 737s, a MAX 7, a MAX 8, a MAX 9, a MAX 10, a MAX 200. The market isn't there for 5 of them. There's too much customization. There's too much reaction by the OEMs to what the other guy's doing. You can't just build an airplane because the other guy's building one. You've got to build one that you feel your customer base really needs and wants. The most successful airplane ever built is the 737-800. I think that the market is well catered for the huge menu of airplanes that are out there, both on the wide bodies and on the narrow bodies. I mean, of course, it's easy for an airline or a lessor to say to Boeing, yeah, of course we're interested, give us a look at the plans. But will the airplane ultimately be successful from an owner's perspective and for 20, 25 years? If another airplane enters the market, there may be some markets that are there for it, but ultimately it's going to have to cannibalize something else that's out there. And that's where it becomes dangerous for owners of airplanes buying aircraft. Are we sure that we're buying one that has its own market and isn't just cannibalizing something else? Or if it's going to cannibalize something else, that it's a much better machine. And I think we'll just have to study the 797 pretty carefully before we dive into it.
Right. Did you sign for the Sonic Cruiser, Steve?
No. No.
That
We
was
called it the Sonic Bruiser.
Yeah, it got a few nicknames, didn't it? Would you
And
concur
once
with,
oil prices went up, that airplane became totally
but
uneconomic.
it kind of delivered the 787, I guess, in terms of the economics rather
it
than...
led to
yeah.
the 787.
Would you
and,
concur with Gus's thoughts on the fact that Boeing's got enough on its plate at the
Yeah,
moment?
there's just, the menu has gotten too large, and for some airlines it's very confusing. And what it leads to is when airlines have too many aircraft and types and subtypes, it significantly increases their cost of operations in terms of crews, infrastructure, spares, training. and the inability to interchange aircraft easily in their network. So we believe in standardization, simplification, because in the end, the typical airline customer of today, the young customer that Ali is referring to, they don't care whether it's a Boeing airplane or an Airbus airplane, or it's got a certain engine, whether it's a Pratt engine or a Rolls engine or a G engine. They're looking for value, price, convenience, scheduling opportunities, and I think the manufacturers have to understand this dynamic shift in the marketplace, where the customer really is, as he said, becoming the real focal point.
Crisma, you've just taken your first, relatively recently, your first Dreamliners, is that right?
Yes.
Yeah, and you've got a nice cabin in there, actually. You've got a, you just launched it.
We took already first 2 deliveries.
Yeah.
Third one is just weeks away, and another 2 by the end of the year.
And you're not going to be ripping the cabin out next week, are you?
No. I mean, it is. We put, I mean, just to refer to the previous discussions, I mean, in life, in business, you can't have it all. And airlines tends to have it all today, and that is, I think, a crucial mistake in some cases. Talking business models, I mean, business models are so much approaching towards each other that basically, you know, I was teasing a couple of years ago a guy from Ryanair that you turn from who cares for customer to customer care. Basically, by business model are approaching legacy carriers, if you like to call them, or full service network, are cutting the cost wherever we can, introducing unthinkable service changes. I recently flew with major legacy carrier, basically in business, almost nothing. In economy, you have to buy. It's all so basically, and the other side, low-cost carriers are moving to reservation systems, paying attention to the transfers so that the passenger can have seamless travel. And but all in all, it's always you need to find your niche and the cost control. In our case, our business class, it's actually first class service by industry standards, of course. If you have up to 89-inch pitch and whole setup, especially the window seats with the suite, and economy class, it's almost premium economy. Yeah. This is what the market needs, and this is what you need to basically follow.
Right. Okay. Adu, we don't see Concorde coming back soon. You don't think there's a disruptor in the supersonic era?
No, I think pointless. We won't land anywhere because of air traffic control congestions. And the 3-hour flight becomes 7 because of airport congestion. So I think the real issues are, honestly, I think aeroplanes are fine. Yeah. And as the panel said, there are too many of them, too many types, and everybody's confused, and there are only 2 suppliers. So the reality is to do with the airports.
Okay. I'm going to pivot this a little bit because I'd like to talk about diversity. I don't know if any one of you, I heard this last night, I think it's correct, that on Wednesday morning, EasyJet are going to fly their new A321neo in here, flown by an all-female crew. They wouldn't have announced that, obviously, if it's an all-male crew, because that would be normal, unfortunately. EasyJet has got, I think, about 7 or 8% of their cabin crew, their flight crew are females. But that's kind of reflective of across, I think, the key part of the industry where there is very much a male domination in the industry. It has been traditionally, it's been changing. I looked at some old adverts that used to run in Flight International for the 1960s, and not only to be qualified to apply to be a pilot for training with British Airways or BEA and BOAC, not only did you have to be male, but you had to be under 24 and unmarried. So the conditions have changed slightly since then. So I'm just going to start with Christine, but I would like to hear from a couple of others as well about this. What do you think we need to do to make the industry more appealing to females, to ladies, to women? And how can we make that happen sooner rather than later? Because we can talk about it. Akbar's comments, I think, actually been quite helpful. I know they were, didn't seem it at the time, but it certainly brought that, and I don't think he meant it, to be honest. I think he was being somewhat flippant, and you know Akbar well. Mm-hmm. He was being somewhat flippant, and it created a storm, which I think has really moved it up the agenda. I mean, it was on the BBC News and everything, so... what can the industry do to make this happen fast?
Yeah, I think that the reaction after Akbar comment was very useful to have this subject a little bit more at the forefront of some priorities. I think that EasyJet has been doing quite a big job, and my ex-colleague Caroline has been pushing a lot under our leadership the pilot subject, because average 4%, we are a little bit like EasyJet, we are in 7-8% of female pilots. So concerning pilot and engineers, it's just about trying to convince or having role model for girls very early in their childhood, for them to understand that it's a very good career for any young girl. So it's about STEM. So it's something that could be supported not only by the industry, but also by government or by training academies, because in fact, when you talk to a female pilot or female engineers, for instance, for a pilot, having a roster very organized, you can organize your life, you can have a family, and most of the time you have a very good career. So it's very positive, for some girls to understand that, but most of the time they never have the opportunity to really have a discussion with anybody. So having female pilots talking about it, videos, education in schools. After that, that's one subject, and then you have the senior executive, part that it's the next step. So. And I had a discussion previously today. It's not about appointing a woman because we need more women. It's about also for our industry to realize that we have customers that are diverse, and that if, as an industry, we are not able to create the same diversity as a senior leadership level, we'll not be able to answer to this diversity with a same level of understanding and representation at a board level and a senior executive level. And I'm not the only one trying to do that. You're doing a lot of initiatives too. But if it's not a priority, it will never happen. So coaching and mentoring have to be, and maternity leave are also something that airlines could work on. How do you support women in their 30s not to stop their career and move on? So I'm sure you had some experience.
So it's kind of two levels, really. It's at grassroots level in the schools and at universities,
Absolutely.
and then it's once we get to the aviation industry and make it. Kaylin,
yes, this is an
thoughts?
extremely important topic, and it's fantastic to have Christine here and in such a leadership role in the industry. That's fantastic. So it starts with a fundamental cultural commitment, Max. It's one thing to say that you're going to have quotas, and different governments, different parts of the world will have quotas for boards of directors or so on. But that doesn't, at the end of the day, that has a limited effect, in my opinion. It goes to the cultural dynamic that you have throughout the leadership. And what we've done in Air Canada's case, in addition to having some programs like EasyJet, we've had several flights which were operated by all female crews. We've got something like 10% of our pilot base are women, but what we're trying to do is actually not restrict it, obviously, only to pilots and to crews. The mindset, as Christine indicates, the mindset for a young lady coming up is even once inside an airline, once inside a company like Air Canada, is to go in a certain direction career-wise, and that might not necessarily gravitate towards maintenance and engineering, flight operations, etc. And so what we're actually doing, actively mentoring, having programs. We have a program in our company called Women in Aviation, and it's run by one of our senior executives, a woman, and she organizes many role model examples of women who have either cracked through the glass ceiling, and as we like to say, we encourage our women to not only crash through the glass ceiling, but ensure that a man is there to clean it up afterwards. And so we encourage that through these mentoring sessions. We are taking the time now to go into universities and even of course high schools and elementary schools. I think it's an extremely well made point. We're not snapping our fingers and solving this issue tomorrow morning, and part of it is what it is that attracts women, what roles, and these are not necessarily conventional roles that are attractive to women. And so that is the effort that is required. And one of the things that we've done once we've had an opportunity to create roles that are perhaps a little bit outside a woman's comfort zone, we've actually encouraged the taking of that responsibility outside the comfort zone, but then you have to provide the right environment to ensure that there is success. And so this is one that is, to really tackle this, and you have to be able to build inside the organization the levers that do that, and it's not going to be by saying we're going to have a certain number of women directors on the board, and that's going to solve the issue. I think that is too facile, and it's something that organizations that do that, I think are looking to get brownie points in their press releases, but it doesn't actually move the needle. So I think that's kind of directionally where we're heading. It is a long game, not something that is solved overnight.
Max, actions speak louder than words. We have more female employees at Air Lease Corporation than men. So we've taken a very proactive approach to mentor them, build them.
And what's the secret? What, have you just been...
we first of all encourage all of them to be shareholders, to feel like when they come to work in the morning, they are owners of the company. We mentor them. We put them in all the different departments. We have leadership in many of our departments that are female dominated, and we encourage them to also change between departments, and we want them to be embraced in all the decision making and the corporate strategy. So it's been really very productive.
And that's since the start, because it's
Yes,
relatively
from day
young company,
one.
isn't it?
From day one.
And, from India's perspective, we are so used to being ruled by women. One of our prime ministers who was prime minister for about 20 years was a woman. So we are very used to it. We have so many heads of department who are women already. In terms of pilots, though we have only 12% of our pilots are women.
So what percent?
12%.
That's quite a high ratio.
It's pretty decent. But the head of recruitment for pilots is a woman, and there is a clear mandate that in the next 3 years that 12% number should go up to 33%.
Wow.
So we are actually, as we grow and we need to recruit a lot of pilots, we are making sure that a disproportionate number of them are women, and they are doing exceedingly well. The heads of department who are women are heads of department, not of course because they are women, but because they were the best that we could find.
Absolutely.
And so they have terrific role models. And I think the lady pilots as well, we have just last week the first woman pilot who became an examiner in our country. And she's a 32-year-old girl. She's, talking about her experiences. She was on a Facebook chat I saw last Sunday where there were just these few hundred people, who were talking to her on Facebook about what it means to be a pilot. I think it's incredible. We have this fantastic opportunity in a culture which actually recognizes most of our goddesses, for God's sake, are women.
I think that culturally, in fact, when you look at profiles, etc., and the opportunities, most of the time, Europe is a little bit lagging behind because we are a little bit more traditional, etc. And I agree, in India, you have this flexibility, and it's all about culture. What you mentioned, it's only about culture. And Europe is not always the most flexible,
And I think it will affect our ability to grow if we don't take that view, because we aren't going to find enough people to run the industry in 20
There's
years'
a huge
time.
pilot shortage.
Yeah,
in the next
exactly.
And if I could add one more thing, Max, on this topic, one of the things that several of the women leaders in our company and on our board have recommended, I think there's an emerging practice developing in some countries, is encouraging people like myself to not participate in panels unless there's a woman on the panel, to get that voice heard. And I think that, I'd say to the people in the audience here and elsewhere, if you try to apply that as a rule to yourself, to guide yourself, it actually is a small thing that ends up moving the needle and, getting conversations like that out there. So, that's something that I've started to abide by, and it's so far so good.
I think Richard made that joke, didn't he, at IATA? He said 5 middle-aged white men are going to discuss diversity.
Exactly. No, that's the point. That's exactly the point.
I'm conscious of time because I know people have got places to go. I wanted to get some thoughts from everybody on the panel, which with so many, it was obviously a bit of a challenge. We've got there. Now, I'm going to do something which used to drive me mad when I am a journalist, which is I'm going to say if we can have some questions specifically about market disruptors. I don't want to have questions about the next order from ALC or something. Can we just have some questions? I've got that as an exclusive, by the way, Robert. So if there's anything specifically about market disruptors, what we've already discussed or anything else, I'd be delighted to hear. And we've got microphones both sides. Sorry, you are Robert Wall.
Hi, Robert Wall with Wall Street Journal. I guess I was going to ask about the biggest market disruptor, perhaps my president, and I'm just wondering. We've had a terrific run for air travel and the industry with the traffic growth, and now we've got Washington driving a policy agenda that's leading to trade barriers going up, and we all know about the coupling of the two. So I'm just wondering what your sense is, what this will do to your growth prospects for the industry. Are you seeing things yet, either in cargo or in passenger demand? And how ready are you to pull the trigger on delaying orders?
In fact, on that, I'd like to talk about protectionism if we have time in a wider scope. So does anyone want to actually respond to that?
We have seen no evidence from any of our customers, more than 100 different airlines that we talk to, of any reduction in traffic or advance reservations or cargo movement. In fact, it's been the opposite so far.
No, I think that's exactly our experience. We are the largest foreign carrier into the United States based on frequencies at Air Canada, and both in terms of traffic to the United States, from the United States, and from the United States internationally, connecting over our Canadian hubs, really it's continued to be extremely strong. So what is the takeaway from all that? I think the takeaway is that while people are concerned, there's an overhang as to what the next step is. I think there's a sense that a lot of the trade dynamics that have been put up there by the current U.S. government are largely statements of negotiation intent, and that we may not end up fully at what it is that has been proposed. And so I think generally, businesses are continuing to do business, that tourists are continuing to travel, and there really has not been any noticeable decline. And so that is the good news of the story. The less good news is the fact that there is some level of overhang, and I think we've seen it reflected in the stock price of many of the airlines that operate in the United States, and perhaps some of the leasing firms. There's certainly an overhang as to whether there's a shoe to drop, but we haven't seen any evidence of it yet.
So from a developing country's perspective, of course, sanctions are something that we probably haven't heard of for the most part. We have people who are actually moving from trains to starting to fly. They don't particularly care about what's happening globally. Our domestic market itself is so very large that people are just happy to fly within India and to neighboring countries, and don't seem to be particularly bothered at this stage by global sanctions or potential global slowdown.
On the broader subject of protectionism, Jan, in Saudi Arabia, there's been liberalization going on there. Is that producing intense competition for you, increased competition for you, or are you still as the state carrier, if you like, getting first dibs on routes?
So the opening of the domestic market, which was the start from the government, has produced from a monopoly situation 9 years ago for Saudi, has produced now 4 serious competitors. We have started our own internal competitor, Flyer Deal, with a low-cost carrier. So yes, you can clearly see the loosening of our restrictions, releasing the fare caps, etc., is adding competition, and it's good for the customer. On the international scene, it's also work in progress. It has to do with the visas. It has to do with the opening, particularly for travelers, business, and leisure travelers coming to the kingdom. Even the pilgrims, opening up the number of visas. So yes, it's definitely starting to see a lot of movement. We're starting to see movement with the opening of the new terminal in Jeddah, with the opening of new terminals, international airports throughout the kingdom, with 27 airports in the kingdom. It is really fueling competition, and this is good. It's good for the customers of goods. It's a challenge for us, and it's part of this disruption in a positive sense that the airline, as I mentioned a while ago, that the airline is going through.
And Adel, in your world, you are the fourth carrier, I guess, in the UAE, in terms of priority from a government perspective. Am I right with the Dubai and the Emirates and Etihad?
Yeah, from a UAE point of view, well, probably we're the only publicly listed carrier in the Arab world. But from a UAE point of view, they've adopted a policy of an open sky years ago. And that has never caused a problem. Anybody is welcome to come, and as the more the merrier. It's tough, it's difficult, but it does generate and stimulate people to travel. I think if we then go on to the sort of the pan-Arab, it's a mixed bag of everything. From those who claim to have an open sky, but with a lot of limitation, and those who don't want competition. And the more you close your doors and airports, the worse your national carriers do. And that has been evident. The airlines that struggle in the Arab world, those who have not allowed an open sky and allowed people to fly in because they are complacent. What I think we've seen in Saudi, particularly in our experience over the last 10 or 15 years, it's modernized completely. It's grown where it was. You were able only to fly to 4 airports in the past internationally. Today you can fly to any airports in Saudi, and we as Air Arabia fly to 13 airports in Saudi now. It is going to change through a change, as Jan said, but it is, I think, a positive change that as the time goes on, it develops a lot of new markets and opportunities for everybody. Of course, it makes the airline's life, whether it's Saudi or non-Saudi, within those routes, much more difficult.
And I'd like to pivot again, because we've got 2 icons of the leasing market in here. And I just want to know from Gus and Steve's perspective how you see disruption playing out in your world from a leasing perspective, because obviously we're seeing new entrants coming in. They've got different business models. Some perhaps don't get the industry. There's a slight naivety, I guess, around when they come into the industry about some of the things they can and can't do. So is it going to cause a structural change to the financial opportunity that exists in the market, or do you think that the good and the great will still rise to the top?
Look, if we look at what's happened in the global financial system since the crisis, interest rates went to nothing. So people are searching for yield anywhere they can get it. Doesn't matter if it's yen, dollars, or euros, rates are on the floor. So the normal opportunity set for investors to go to is gone. Bonds, mortgages, credit cards, all those things they tend to invest in massive size. They're looking for alternative assets all the time. And so the airplane business has become a much more mature industry, a much better understood industry over the course of the last, say, 7 or 8 years. And people feel much more comfortable investing in it. It's not seen as an esoteric, high volatility investment any longer. There are parts of it that are. That's the reality too, of course. People don't always get that. But for the most part, it's not as risky as it was a few years ago, because there's a lot more funding behind it. It's a lot more stable. Asset values are. There's a lot of liquidity. But no doubt, look, in the absence of yield elsewhere, we've a lot of tourists have arrived. Now, those guys will stick around for a while. But as soon as rates rise, an awful lot of them will just head for the hills, because they don't have platforms, the vast majority. They'll ask people to manage it for them. They don't want to build a global platform. And so as soon as they see more normalized levels in treasuries or bonds or Japanese bonds, I suspect they'll go. So I think, look, the people who are in it for the long haul, the great advantage we have is more people are going to travel every year than last year. There's 100 million people getting on a plane for the first time in their lives every year. And that's not going to change. So if you're in it for the long haul, sure, yeah, you've seen some compression of yields, etc., over the course of the last few years. And many of the panelists here have taken great advantage of it, and God bless them. No longer. Hopefully the tables will turn someday. Hopefully we'll get the tables turned back someday. Sorry, Caitlin, you were just close. Sorry. No, I can look at my left and right too. But I do think that there's a tremendous opportunity for airlines to take advantage of the sale-leaseback market right now. The last time we did a sale-leaseback was 2013. But there is an awful lot of money. It's an easy entry point for, as I'll call them, a tourist to come into the business, because the asset is leased for 12 years or 10 years, whatever the period is, and there's nothing to do with it. You can just put it in the drawer. Now, many investors today also have forgotten that there is credit risk in this business. So they're assuming that taking an aircraft lease is like a treasury bond, which they're not. This quite the same credit, and also that at the end something has to be done with the asset. But in the meantime, these guys get paid on a quarterly basis on the cash coming in the door, so they don't really care that much about the longer term. Whereas those who've been in it for a long time and will be in it for a long time to come have a very different outlook.
And it's that comment that Gus made, is that storing up trouble for some of these financial companies that aren't focusing on the asset and the return conditions and things like that?
I think a lot of these newcomers have one commodity, and that's funding. But they don't have the relationships with the OEMs. They don't have the relationships with the airlines. They don't necessarily bring in new customers to the OEMs. I mean, one of the great contributions that the established lessors have made is bring in new customers, help start up airlines like Adele.
You did? Thank you.
We started the airline, took a risk starting an airline that later developed into the largest low-cost airline in the Middle East. You have to have value added. You have to work with the OEMs. You have to develop airline customers. You have to develop airlines from day one. You have to readapt airlines. So you have to be a proactive player in the airline industry. You can't just be a guy that has a checkbook. And I think that's what a lot of the newcomers don't understand. It's a long-term business. You have to have long-term commitments, and you have to ride out the waves. And unless you do that, you're not going to have a long-term successful platform.
And this tourist season, when's it going to finish?
When rates rise, I think that's when you'll see it, because they don't care what asset they invest in. They just care about a return. So, it could be hospitals, it could be spaceships. They just don't care. And they're completely indifferent. It's just where the yield is. And so once that happens, we'll see them go. But there's plenty of room, though, as well. It should be said, Max, that the size of the industry is doubling every 15 years. There's an enormous amount that needs. The leasing business at the moment has to do a minimum of $45 billion a year of just new financing, let alone refinancing its own assets, just to meet the existing demand for the product. That's every single year. And if the leasing business is going to grow, which the value of deliveries is growing, that has to keep going up by 5% a year. These are very big numbers for a small group of companies to keep pace with it. Every year, we're going to be doing $45–50 billion of aircraft purchases. And so there is a demand for more in the leasing space, but demand, I think, for more of a real global platform that can bring value rather than just someone who doesn't want to buy a platform, just wants to do a sale leaseback and then move on when the alternatives for their money changes.
Great. Well, on that, I'm going to hand back to Alan. Hopefully the microphone's working now. And from my perspective, I just want to say thank you very much for a fascinating discussion. Thank you.
So, ladies and gentlemen, that's it. Winding up on this one. I've certainly found some strong opinions and views. Thank you very much. And it's been delightful. I hope we're going to be able to do this again. And thank you, Farnborough International, for creating this to enable us to bring the airlines back into the air show. And thank you to the audience for being here as well. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for being here. Thank you.